All right, chapter 21 is new renewable energy alternatives, and it highlights Germany quite a bit because actually Germany leads the world in renewables with wind and solar. And we're doing a great job at this as well, but they have actually one of the strongest economies in Europe, so they're doing way better than we are with this type of stuff. So again, this chapter is about renewable resources, which is a small portion of our electricity portfolio. It's only about 13% of all the electricity that we have going on. So it's not just wind or solar, but geothermal, hydropower, and bioenergy is actually all included within renewables. So make sure that you do understand that it includes a lot more than that. So again, biomass is the largest renewable energy in the US. Hydroelectric is the largest renewable electricity source that we have going on then. So how the government can actually promote renewables is pretty interesting. They can fund research and development, obviously. They could help end subsidies for fossil fuels, making fossil fuels, a little bit more obsolete. That would be great. Instead of doing that, they could subsidize more for solar and wind. So we actually do something called a feed-in tariff policy, where utilities pay a premium price by law for renewables, and renewables get priority to be sold first out to people as an energy source. So Germany does this, and it encourages farmers to turn some of their land over to solar farms because then they're guaranteed money. Instead of taking the risk and gamble on a crop, they know that if they have these solar farms or these wind turbines put on their property, they are guaranteed a staple, and then everything above and beyond could go back to the grid and be sold back. There are tax rebates for PV cells or photovoltaic cells. There are tax benefits for wind, as well as net metering, which occurs with homes that have solar powers and panels or wind. They can actually sell the extra energy that those panels create back to the utility company. They actually stopped this in Nevada not too long ago, and it decimated the renewable sales because people started to not want to then purchase solar panels for their home if there wasn't going to be a benefit. So solar isn't just solar panels. It is PV cells or PV cells in general, but there are other avenues that go into it. So there's something called passive solar energy systems. And passive solar energy is a heating technique that you can utilize the sun for your house by doing things like building your house with southern facing windows, so it's able to capture more sunlight in the winter and warm your house. Or building overhangs over your windows. So during the summer months when the sun will be beating down in your house and heating it up, you actually have that natural shade. Heat absorbing construction in cold climates. So maybe having an insulation like straw or some of the deep jean thick insulation that they can put into a home. Even having a house made of brick versus, not brick is a big difference, because brick will actually hold heat longer and it won't heat up as quickly as well. So homes will actually stay cooler or warmer depending on the time of the year. Planting vegetation around your house, like bushes or trees, can actually allow for more shading to cool your house down in the summer months. And then obviously if it loses its leaves, you're going to allow for more sunlight to come in during the winter to offer that heat during those times. So we have that going for us. Active solar, I'm going to skip over here for a second. Active solar energy systems are the energy systems that are going to have to use some sort of power. So they're going to collect heat from the sun in water or air or antifreeze, and they're going to pump that through the house with solar collectors. So you can use it as a water heater, have panels maybe that are heating things up and heat up the water, and you can pump that to your house, kind of like a water tank. You could do it for many different things, but you can have air pumped through that's warmer. That's called active, again, because we're using a pump to move that heat in some way, shape, or form. Where passive is just, hey, if the sun comes in, it comes in. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So that's kind of what we have going on here. We will jump back to photovoltaic cells in a second, but here's a second. Basically, these PVC cells are going to capture energy from the sun. They're going to transform it directly into an electrical energy. And that's how you can power your house. It gets stored in batteries or a generator. And again, this is limited by the availability of the sunlight in your location. So we are further north. We don't get as much direct sunlight here. Again, the technology for a lot of these cells is getting better, but us versus Arizona, drastically different circumstances when it comes to using photovoltaic cells. Some of the positives of them, though, are low environmental impact. They produce clean energy. Some places, though, aren't sunny, and that's a negative. The price for these things are actually pretty high. So it could be a very expensive overhead, and it might impact, actually, if you have solar farms, desert ecosystems negatively. All of a sudden you have these mirrors and things up that are reflecting things. But again, we'll come back to those in a second. So concentrating the sun's rays is one way that you could actually do some things. You could do solar cookers as a passive form. We make these after the AP exam. We cook some s'mores in there, and that again is just passively using the sunlight, reflecting it back towards cooking, and that's how they're doing it here. This one, concentrating sunlight's here. Again, we can make power plants that actually turn a turbine. So in this picture down here, we are passively taking these mirrors, and they actually follow the sun throughout the day. They're reflecting that sunlight back to one concentrated location. So in this case, in the middle here, what we have in this power plant is water that's going to start to boil, and it turns a turbine and it creates electricity. So these mirrors, again, follow the sun. They're awesome. This is passive. They're huge in certain places, but they're extremely hot. So there have been occasions where birds fly like kind of through these big beams. And if you've ever like fried ants with a magnifying glass, the birds will actually fry. But it doesn't happen very often. And again, this produces a lot of electricity in certain places. And there is no photovoltaic cell doing this. This is all passive sunlight. Just have a mirror out. So again, photovoltaic cells strike a silicon plate, which releases electrons, and they're fed to a wire. The AP test won't call them solar panels, but PV cells. So solar energy is a fast growing, but only supplies a small percentage of the US's electricity. Houses with PV on the grid are still connected to public utilities, and they can supplement power if needed. If all of a sudden it's not a sunny day, they can pull from the grid and pay for their electrical sources. If your house is completely off grid, you live in the middle of the boonies, you would actually collect solar energy all day. You would then charge up batteries in a system so that at night when you wanted to turn the lights on, the batteries have that stored energy. This is great in rural areas, again, where connecting to the grid might be expensive. Again, there are some drawbacks to solar. There are places where it's not always sunny, and the upfront cost of equipment is a drawback. So it's becoming more affordable with rental services and everything else. But, it's hard. It's hard with other things going on. So there are some drawbacks with places not getting direct sunlight. And again, here's that talk about the houses that are on grid and off grid. Wind turbines are pretty straightforward. They're a turbine that is powered by the wind with a generator that's inside and produces electricity. So China has the most power from wind at 27%, and the US is second. But in terms of highest percentage of their own electricity, Denmark is the leader. So we've got some things about it that we like, that we don't like. Again, it's renewable and clean. Unfortunately, we have the NIMBY going on, so not in my backyard. People don't want this big, giant thing in their view and vision. It can kill birds and bats, which again, we need them for pollinating. In some places and times, there's no wind, so that can be a drawback as well. There are also the ability to do offshore wind, which is considered more consistent than on land, but people don't want to go to the beach and see them. So there are some drawbacks at certain times. If it's not windy, the places aren't windy at all, we don't get that energy. So that's unfortunate with that. Geothermal is our next one. Geothermal is the next type of renewable. It's a groundwater heated by magma, which is natural underground. So we can get magma here, heating the groundwater, which then will start to rise as steam, turn that turbine, create energy as we go through stuff. So it is natural. We can pump that heat through homes or buildings, or we can actually create a power plant like you see here. So you can take the steam, again, spin the turbine. It produces a little bit of hydrogen sulfide gas, which is an air pollutant, which is unfortunate. But again, there's not a lot that's created besides the hydrogen sulfide gas. Some of the biggest places for this, it is renewable unless you pump the aquifer completely dry. If you get rid of the water in the ground, then there's nothing to actually create the steam. So that's an issue. But most electricity in Iceland actually comes from geothermal. So you can actually see here's Iceland, and obviously they've got a lot going on here. Another way to do geothermal is in your own personal home. You could do a ground source where they will actually heat and pump the air that's naturally underground through pipes and back into your house. So ground temperature is warmer in the winter and colder in the summer. So you could naturally pump cool air in the summer back to your house, or warm air in the winter back to your house. And that reduces your cost on air conditioning and heating. It is expensive up front. You do have to dig up a lot. You have to do a lot of connections, but it is more consistent. Again, we don't have that accessibility everywhere on the planet to do geothermal, but, you know, again, expense, and then the hydrogen sulfide are some negatives. Wind energy is pretty experimental. We have places where they do exist out in the ocean, and we're trying to make sure it doesn't cause damage to the ocean and the species that are around there. So we have them, but again, it's not really widespread. Some of the other things that they do are tidal energy. And as the tides come in and out naturally each day, we've experimented with having then the tide pass through kind of like what looks like a mini dam, turns a turbine, creates a generator, and all that fun stuff. So you can actually see that more down in this picture. Again, this is experimental. We have great locations for this in Alaska. There's huge highs and low tides there, and it's a good place to put a turbine to harness this energy, especially since it's passive. We don't have to do anything to pump it or do anything else. OTEC is a theoretical way of using ocean thermal energy conversion. We don't have it yet. It's in the brains, but it's not really there. So it's something that we are still think-tanking. Hydrogen fuel cells are the last type of energy you should know. The diagram shows how they operate by doing electrolysis. So basically they split water into hydrogen gas and oxygen gas. The splitting process uses a lot of energy. We have to use fossil fuels to actually do the splitting of the water. So kind of what's the point? If you're using fossil fuels anyway, it's not really an advantage or disadvantage. So I would take a look at how this process actually works. But we need to figure out how to use hydrogen without utilizing fossil fuels for the process. So we're looking into algae to do this process and potentially replace gasoline and diesel in our cars for the future. So again, low environmental impact with no CO2 produced, except for the fact that we have to use fossil fuels to do the splitting. Negative is that the technology is super expensive and energy is needed, fossil fuels, to create that hydrogen gas to be used in the fuel cell. So once we figure that out, maybe this will actually become the replacement for gasoline. And we are done.